Check, check. I'm checking the mic.
Check, check. I'm checking the mic.
And the mic sounds pretty good.
Checking the mic. And the mic sounds pretty good.
So I'm going to go ahead and begin my stream. So, good evening and welcome to the stream. Tonight I'm going to be continuing my reading of The Power of Stepping Away by Talia Haibara, who is my cousin. And last time I gave a quick intro, so if you're interested in knowing why I did this and what prompted it, I guess you could watch the first episode of this series. But yeah, basically I'm reading a book that my cousin wrote, and yeah, not sure there's much else to say about it. Oh my gosh. My cat is leaping across the room like a gazelle. Cat, just barely a cat, just barely out of kitten phase, and he is still completely insane. But anyway, so yeah, I'm gonna continue reading this. Last time I read for about an hour. Tonight I'll probably read for another hour. Yeah, I'll mainly be reading and interjecting with a few comments as I see fit. You may notice that from the last stream, my appearance has changed significantly. For one thing, I got a haircut, and for another thing, I'm trying on some new, super cool, clear glasses, which I ordered online and finally got. But I'm not sure how well... yeah, that doesn't really change anything, but yeah, just take a look. They're like totally clear, and I think they're awesome, and yeah, so I got 3 different pair, and I'm just trying them on like day by day just to see if I like them. So that is completely irrelevant to reading this book, but it's just a fact about my life that I thought that I would share with whoever might be interested. So I do have my fire going in the background here on my second monitor, and I do have a cup of tea, which is always important to the reading experience. And so, yeah, without further ado, here is beginning at Chapter 5. Chapter 5 tonight of The Power of Stepping Away. As with last time, before I forget to do this, let me go ahead and paste into the chat. I don't think I can do it. You're not allowed to modify the description for a video until after you've stopped it on Twitch, but I can post in the chat a link to both Talia's the link to buy the book, as well as the link to her Instagram account. She's just trying to boost her online presence, and so there are links to those two things, just in case you should be interested. Okay, so now for real, without further ado, here is The Power of Stepping Away, Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Korea. And as always, let me know how the audio is coming across. Last time I used Twitch soundtrack to put some music in the background, but I thought it was just kind of irritating, so this time I'm just going without any background sound at all. Okay, for real, Chapter 5. A year after I met my new friends, I decided to go to Korea with them. This was 2007, the summer before my junior year of high school. I was 17 years old. They told me about a retreat in Korea where every person was supposed to go at least once in their life. They said if I went there, I would be right where heaven is located. They said if I had any bad ancestors, I could save them by going or restoring them in some way. This place was year-round retreat. This place had year-round retreats. One was scheduled to start for a month during the summer. It was for young adults like my friends and me. So being a good church member, I agreed to go. This workshop was supposed to be special too. It would prepare me to get blessed. Blessing is a term that means married in the Unification Church. I packed my bags the night before. That night, I lay in bed and thought of all the new experiences I would have. I was going to climb a mountain, eat spicy food, and make a lot of new friends. I could hardly sleep. I felt excited to leave home for an extended time. By this time, G and I were best friends. Super close. The night before leaving, I called, let's call him Jason, and said, "But what if I meet someone I like and I want to marry them?" I was probably talking about him or G's brother. I had hesitations, therefore. I wish in retrospect I would have listened to my hesitations and doubt more. At that time, I knew I really liked G's siblings and mother. Her dad was a little more difficult to get used to, but I grew so close to her brothers that I started developing a crush on them. Jason was my other friend's brother, and I developed a small crush on him too. I felt I couldn't express it in any way, and I think this frustrated me in some ways. I never thought about leaving the church when I was young, though. I thought I found the truth. My church friends and parents made sure I thought this too. I guess it was a huge blessing, no pun intended, that the blessings never worked out for me in all my 28 years, since this is when I formally separated myself from the church. Because imagine, I did get blessed, and then I wanted to leave the church. It would have been 100 times harder. Our flight left in the middle of the day. We had to be there way ahead of time to get through security, though. I hauled my suitcase into the van. Mom and Dad were already in the front seat. They fully supported me going. Mom was even going to meet me in Korea in 20 days. I was going to be gone a whole freaking month. Actually, 40 days, so even longer than a month. This is the longest I had ever been away from home. Before that, the longest I had been away from home was a week. I arrived in Cleveland at G's house. There, I met with G and Jason waited with their suitcases. So the three of us were off to the airport. I had a crush on Jason, and G was my best friend, so I felt excited. It was summer in America, and in Korea, it was very hot. When we arrived at the church center, I don't know what else to call this massive and unusual place. We were separated into boys/men and girls/women. The females stayed on one floor, and my guy friends stayed on another floor. G stayed on the same floor as me. Jason stayed on the bottom floor with the men. The women walked up a steep hill to their floor. The whole building was built into a mountain. The boys had it easy because their floor was at the bottom of the mountain, but the women had to walk up the mountain to get to the top of the building. By the time I got to the top, I was sweating and exhausted. I felt so hot and muggy, so humid. G quickly made a bunch of new friends. I was a loner. I dedicated myself to study and prayer. Also, for some reason, I was determined to eat as much of the Korean food as I could, so I would not lose weight climbing the mountains. A good idea even to present me. I got very, very sick. It was called the Cheongpyeong cough. Boogers came out of my eyeballs. I coughed and coughed and coughed, and picked boogers out of my eyes. Mom finally arrived, and soon she got the Cheongpyeong cough too. Everybody did. Some people sounded like they were dying, the way they hacked out their lungs at night. I wonder what that is. I'm gonna just real quick, I'm just gonna look that up. Just for my own edification. Cheongpyeong cough. It's interesting. There's nothing coming up for that on Google. I wonder why. Cheongpyeong. Make sure I got the spelling right. Cheongpyeong. Cheongpyeong. Yeah, it's interesting. There's nothing about that on Google, which says to me, I don't know what that says. It must have been some local colloquialism that Talia picked up on. All right, interesting. You know, as I look at the screen there, I kind of realize maybe it actually helps if I turn on a bright tab here. It kind of helps the light of the stream, it seems like. Yeah, that's gives it some dimension, I guess. I'll just leave that light on. There was beauty, though. At the top of the mountain, I sat on a large rock and fell asleep, folded over. I found a bunch of four-leaf clovers, signs of good luck. I thought the landscape was beautiful. The mountains and all the green trees and the lake were breathtaking. The air smelled like fresh mountain air. The grounds were beautifully decorated, too. There was no denying this place was some sort of heaven on earth. I felt my spirit being cleansed just by being out in nature. There were confessions. I admitted all my little faults to everyone in the room. Thankfully, everyone else was doing the same thing at the same time, so no one really listened to me. Still, I felt so guilty about saying my faults out loud and worried someone listened to me. We would sit in a large hall and sing and hit each other's bodies to get out the bad spirits. There were hundreds of people in the room. The men sat on the right and the women sat cross-legged on the floor on the left. The room was hot and filled with body heat. Up on stage, a group sang loud, high-spirited songs about heaven and God. We hit and hit each other all over our body. Some people took it very seriously and hit until their body was red and bruised. One time, a girl I admired for her beauty turned to me and told me I was pretty. Another time, a young fat boy tried to touch my butt during the ceremony. I crushed down feeling of how this was so strange and how the music was getting to my mind, how this was so extreme. I was taught blind obedience, and this mind control was done in a way that I didn't realize it was happening. I overcame my sickness in the end. So did my mom. And then it was time to go home. Arriving home, I felt new, raw, and different. First of all, going without makeup was huge for me. I felt naked, and my face looked blank, in my opinion, without makeup. More innocent. I had plucked my eyebrows thin, so that made my eyes look bigger. I didn't do my ritual every morning of putting on my makeup. I have to laugh because I have a monobrow or unibrow, and when I pluck it, I refer to that as my ritual. So it's kind of funny that she's using these words so close together, I guess. I did it to fit in with the church crowd. There was a huge emphasis on purity. I had to dedicate my purity to the church leaders. On being pure, this meant thinking pure thoughts and not having any contact with the opposite sex. So not wearing makeup and looking like a child was part of me keeping my purity. I also wore the clothes at home that I wore in Cheongpyeong, a white shirt and yellow pants. I dressed like I did there. Now I find this really weird because usually my style was more quirky and artsy or spiritual, not so plain. These are all the little ways the church changed me. The outward appearance reflects the inward. Inside, I was becoming a different person to accommodate the standards of the church. Second, I sat through lecture after lecture telling me sex was the ultimate evil and not to date boys. I accepted everything blindly because I didn't know about standing up for my rights or how controlling this was. I hid any objection even from my own self. I didn't allow myself to question. So I just accepted this as how my life would be. I accepted I would get an arranged marriage. I felt determined. I resolved this is what I should do with my life. Third, I stopped hanging out with other friends. I only hung out with G and the other church friends. I self-imposed a disconnection from the outside world. I believed the secular world to be evil. When I got out of the church center, I had a few days in the city with my mom and friends. In the flea market, Jason and I looked at shoes. A salesman called me over to his booth. I went inside, even though I felt strange. The strange man came up behind me and brushed his hands over my chest. My first #MeToo moment. I quietly put down the shoe I was holding and left. I walked over to Jason and looked at socks at the booth with him. I'm sorry, I gotta take a second here. Where? This was at a flea market? That's really shocking. I can't imagine, like, at a flea market. That's, like, really just bold. I shouldn't say bold, it's brazen. Alright. I walked over to Jason and looked at socks at the booth with him. I didn't say a word about what happened. I just felt silent anger at Jason, because why hadn't he been there? Why hadn't he protected me? I never said a word, though. I don't think I've ever told anyone till now. Jason would neither protect me in any way, nor feel bad since he never knew what happened. That's not a real friend. My future self wants to wrap around my past self and tell myself it is okay. Stay away from those strange men, and those are not my friends. Jason was always kind of an arrogant boy. He was an artist and a musician, and that drew me to him. He never really cared about me. When I went to see him in a play, he told me a girl liked him. Maybe he was happy and wanted to share the news. It made me feel jealous, though. He always got attention from girls, and for this I felt jealous. He did notice I was gone on my own for those moments, and he didn't notice how upset and withdrawn I was afterward. He felt hurt, I felt hurt and depressed because of that incident. What more could I expect out of a 17-year-old boy? He cared about himself and didn't notice how I felt. Yeah. So I don't, it's kind of hard to just speak off the cuff like this without organizing my thoughts. Like Talia, I am a writer, and so I really prefer to measure my words carefully and put them down on paper and go through a proofing and drafting process before I ever let them out. But I guess my just kind of off the cuff reaction right now is that this is kind of getting at what I consider to be one of the most dangerous things about religion. Like, the fact, this idea that, kids, and let's just make something clear, like, in pretty much all religions, there's a heavy emphasis on, like, kids, like getting to kids before they've like formulated their own ideas about the world. It almost speaks to how weak the ideas are. Like scientific facts and thoughts spread throughout the world, regardless of whether the listener is a child or an adult. But for religion to take hold, almost all the time, you need to expose people to it when they're innocent and pliable children. And if you drive home the idea, some of these ideas about purity and sex is bad, you're going to create psychological uh, complexes that um, force people to repress their abuse. Like exactly what's happening here, and we've all heard stories like this so many times, and it comes in so many different ways, that I'm really pretty convinced that this is a real thing, and I haven't done any studying. I'm just speaking off the cuff, but this is really what seems to be the case to me. That you have these religious influences that create in kids and young adults a complex about sex, which does not allow them to come forward regarding their abuses. And so I guess I just kind of wanted to corroborate what it sounds like Talia is kind of getting at here. I also I definitely commiserate with her about what it's like to go to a camp and be changed. I went to a religious camp that really had a profound effect on me. Um, I'm an atheist or an agnostic or whatever you want to call it. I don't believe in heaven, or I don't believe in anything supernatural really. Um, but for a time, I was extremely devoutly Christian, and I prayed to myself every day, multiple times per day, and that was the result of going to a Bible camp. And so, yeah, I definitely know what it's like to go to a camp and be kind of exposed and become very motivated to be a religious person. Okay. Ooh. Yeah. Chapter 6 is entitled Economic Crash and World Endings. So far, this book appears to be straight chronological. So she was just talking about 2007, so obviously this is going to be the Great Recession. I've never met anybody who does not feel they were affected in some way by the Great Recession. The next fateful year, the year of the economic crash of 2008, my dad lost his job. We decided to pack up for good and move all the way to Minnesota to live with our grandparents while we figured out how to make do. I've already explained growing up in Northeast Ohio, but every summer my family packed their bags and made their way to West Central Minnesota. My brother and I were the best travelers on this 16-hour drive. We would play games, nap, and listen to music. My mom would always reach back and hold our hands as she drove with the other hand. She always drove, and my dad always navigated. My parents sold me on the idea of moving by saying it would be like an extended summer vacation, like the old days, where we used to stay at my grandparents' house during my childhood. Grandparents' house was so familiar, I knew how it smelled. Usually, it smelled of freshly baked bread and sometimes Play-Doh from the daycare kids. This time, we weren't just paying a visit during a summer vacation. We were going to live there indefinitely. I too have incredibly warm memories of the place Talia is talking about. I went there every summer. My parents and I would, we would all fly up to Minnesota and make a circuit. Both Talia and my families, mostly, probably 80%. Well, let me rephrase that. Both of my parents are from Minnesota. Talia has one parent from Minnesota and one parent, of course, from Japan. Um, but yeah, we both have tons of family in Minnesota, so it was always such a fun place to go, and still is. I remember the summer we moved clearly. I just graduated 11th grade. Isamu had just graduated high school. I disappeared during his grad party and didn't show up until evening, and he was high. The Robinsons came to visit for his party. I was relieved when Isamu showed up to play basketball with Derek and Daniel. Someone snapped a picture. My mom prepared to sell the house almost entirely by herself. Dad and Isamu traveled to Japan and the Philippines in a desperate attempt to get him away from the drugs. During this time, I watched over the endless garage sales my mom held. Man, I had forgotten that Isamu went to the Philippines, and suddenly I'm remembering that. Yeah. During this time, I watched over the endless garage sales my mom held. We sold almost all of our possessions. I asked Mom if I could still keep my clothes. Like a monk, I gave away all my possessions, and only a lamp, pictures, journals, and clothes remained. Mom later said she felt so bad for me having to ask if I could keep my clothes. She gave away everything too. That summer, I printed out the lyrics to Etta James's At Last, Sunday Kind of Love, and Stormy Weather. My cousin Maya and I sang to the songs. Later, Maya told me how she remembered I taped the lyrics to my bulletin board. As I watched the garage sale, I sang At Last and committed the lyrics to memory. The emotion and sentiment stuck with me and later instructed my musical interests as well as my romantic aspirations. The hardest part of the whole move was leaving my brother behind. This happened to me in my senior year when Isamu was 19 years old. I knew Isamu struggled with addiction, and at this point he looked so sick, like a zombie. He had nowhere to go. He had to ask friends to crash on their couch, and one church family took him in for a month or two and decided to kick him out Christmas Day. That's brutal. Why? Why? Why Christmas Day? Why not wait another week or at least a couple days or something? My mom told me later she felt so guilty about leaving him behind when he was so sick. She regretted not staying with him. It killed a part of her to leave my brother behind. I smiled my whole way through this transition. I smiled at every person in my new school. I walked around and around in circular halls. I knew a positive attitude could help me through. Some of the girls called me a chink, and some of the boys joked about my obvious newness to everything. I felt the difference from going to a school with 3,000 students to a school with 600 or so. I stood out like a sore thumb as being one of the only biracial students. Some people assumed I was a foreign exchange student. The halls felt like a stage where everyone watched my actions. The popular students sat on tables in the senior hall and listened to the radio. I eventually made some friends to hang out with. They included me at nights at the movie theater and talked to me at parties. That year, I graduated from the same school as my mom and her mom graduated from. At the end of the year, my parents were so proud of me for speaking at the honors celebration and for getting into a family alma mater university, Hamline University in St. Paul. My future looked bright. First, I would travel as far from home as I could go, Fate would bring me back to Purim, though. Just a random note. Talia, when she writes the movie theater, she spells the word theater with an R-E on the end. I do that too. Well, I do it and then I correct it. But technically, either way is correct. The RE is not used very commonly. So it's interesting that that is like a thing we both have. I'm not sure where we would have gotten that from, but yeah, I always want to do RE for theater. Also, I'm bothered that Talia was referred to in such inappropriate terms. I'm trying not to dominate this reading too much with my own thoughts, but if I can be totally frank, before 2016, I thought that I was part of a generation that had kind of turned the page on racism in a big way. And 2016, and I'll be specific, the aftermath of Trump's election, the white supremacist rally rash that went around the country, it really shook that belief in me. And, things like that really kind of make me realize that maybe I was just wrong. Maybe I just didn't hear it. So that's just a thought there. Chapter 7, The Mission. So you can see this lamp is throwing lights onto the ceiling behind me. And my kitten is very interested in trying to attack them. So he's scaling my keyboard right now to try to get up to them. Hopefully he won't get too crazy. Got a laser pointer here. Alright, back to the reading. That fire's getting it warm in here. That's a dumb joke. Okay. Before I went to college, I became a missionary for the church. My mom and dad packed up the van. I hopped in with them and we started down the road to NYC. Along the way of the first half of the journey, we picked up a girl who was also going to be a missionary. Before we got to our destination, at the seminary in New York, we stopped at a restaurant. I remember it was called the Country Kitchen, and my mom ordered a steak. First of all, she never ate steak, so this was a weird memory. My mom choked on the steak and threw it up on the table. I jumped out of my seat to help her. Before I had a chance to do anything, she coughed it out. I felt so bad. Looking back, it was a sign of more trouble to come, a bad omen. We got back in the car and drove to the seminary. Someone took my picture. That day, I wore a yellow polo. I heard fundraisers who wore polos did better. I knew fundraising would be a big part of the mission. What I didn't know is it was pretty much the entire mission. Every lecture, lesson, and scripture revolved somehow around raising money. At the beginning of every 2/3 months, we got a huge monetary goal to reach for the days ahead. Fundraising entailed going to a parking lot mostly and approaching people. From that point, we sold sun catchers made of seashells from the Philippines. My spiel sounded something like this. Hi, my name is Talia. I am in a group called Global Peace Academy, and I have, ta-da, sun catchers. We are selling them to raise money for overseas service work, and from there we asked for a donation. On admittance day, I had my hair pulled into a bun. It was as clean as military personnel. My friend was greeted by the photographer. She took a picture too. I stood on the sidelines quietly until it was time to have my feet examined for flat feet. This was kind of like a military examination. We were some of the first to arrive. The first weekend, the parents were welcome to stay for some talent show, lecture, and meet and greet. I waited for my parents to leave and for the real mission to begin. When my parents said goodbye, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The first night, I lay in bed and heard voices. Looking back, this was the first sign of schizophrenia. I told myself I was not homesick. The next morning, the leaders announced our teams. I swore I heard these same announcements the night before. I asked the leader, "Were you practicing announcements last night?" The leader responded, "No, we didn't." I almost didn't believe him. I surely heard the announcements over the speaker the night before. These voices I heard were the first sign of schizophrenia. Sorry. I stayed with all the other missionaries in the Unificationist Theological Seminary for 2 months. During this time, we read the scriptures and were tested on the church's history. I felt a little relieved we got to stay in the seminary. I like being with everybody all together. Some part of me knew that when we went out to fundraise, it would be much tougher. I did well in school, and this reminded me of school. I took tests, read a lot from a strange book, and did homework. Sometimes I would write home, assuring them I was having a good time, that I missed them, and I was working extra hard. Everything I did got evaluated by a point system. Passing tests, being physically fit, we ran a mile race in the morning, every morning, and getting along with the leaders was all rewarded in a public announcement each day. We knew who ran the fastest time, who aced the tests, and who gave the best presentations. Sometimes my peers voted on who was the best lecturer, and sometimes they held talent competitions. The girls lived on the first floor. The dorms felt so hot that summer. I lay in my bed just sweating. Sometimes a mosquito would come in and just drive us crazy. After about 2 weeks of this ongoing competition to perform, we started the toughest competition we could imagine, a fight to make the most money as we traveled all over the country. In a typical day, I woke up at 6 o'clock. We studied scripture, exercised in a park, and ate breakfast. When I was a team leader, I struggled terribly to keep any schedule. As a team member, I kept pretty well to my schedule. We lived in vans in packs of 4 to 6 people. After the usual morning routine, we got dropped off in a mall or a department store or parking lot to make money. We had about a 2-hour time span to make money. All day we went out for 2 hours at a time till about 9 or 10 at night, when we came back to count all our money. The end of the night routine took forever. We always had to count up our bills before we slept. By that point, I was exhausted and could not think straight. It took a couple of hours sometimes just to get to bed. We chatted through our cell phones. Our phones connected us to our leaders and to the other teams around the country. Oops, we got a visitor here. What you doing? See that fire? It's pretty cute. What you think? What you think, buddy? He is not a very friendly cat at all. I'm trying not to like spook him too much. He won't sit on laps at all. He's still learning how to cat. That was Pan. Named for this pandemic year. We chatted through our cell phones. Our phones connected us to our leaders and to the other teams around the country. Our leaders called us for pickup during fundraising and to hear how the other teams were doing. Each night, the numbers would come out and we'd learn which team earned the most money. I told myself I wasn't homesick when I was. I distracted myself thoroughly from my true feelings, and maybe that was part of the brainwashing. It certainly was not acceptable to only call my parents once a week, but that was what I was allowed. That's about how often I talk to my parents, and I'm not in a camp or anything. I called my parents once a week. I told them I was having a good experience, working hard, and that I thought about staying another year. To their credit, they made sure my college would allow me to defer another year. They were still concerned I get my education. Because I wanted to stay another year, I postponed my education for another year to be a leader. During leaders training, we stayed in Massachusetts in a small house. I slept in a bed with a few other girls. At 5 a.m, the leaders came through banging pots and pans to wake us up. They had us go outside and stand in a circle. As we stood there with our eyes closed, they poured water and dog food over us. What? Dog food? Why? Afterward, the group leader laughed and told me it was Kipper's dog food, so the brand would be burned in my mind forever. What? It was abusive. What is this? Why? It was abusive. They were definitely a cult. Another time, we kneeled outside on a cold morning on the beach with our hands raised. My back hurt, but they wanted us to feel the pain. I developed anorexia when I was sent to Hawaii with the group leader and a friend. I was afraid to eat, and part of me saw hunger as a weakness. Or rather, the hunger was a motivation to keep me going, and eating was the weakness. I lost a lot of weight, and my blue winter coat grew baggy. Over winter break, I came home and saw my family. Even my brother was there. We watched a movie, and I took a picture with him. While I was back at my grandparents' home, I complained about how much they watched TV. I thought media and the outside world was evil. I went on bike rides and called the leaders, telling them I was annoyed with my family. Even the leaders said to go easy on them. When I came back that winter, I decided for sure I wanted to come back for the second year. The whole time, they subjected me with isolation from my family, only allowing me to call my family once a week. I was sleep deprived, only getting 4 or 5 hours a night. I stared at the pizza crumbs the members left behind, never letting myself eat. I was hungry and tired of having panic attacks. The first year, I ranked as the second highest earning fundraiser, earning an average of more than $700 a day. Whoops. Thought I heard you. What's up? Come here. Yeah. That's about a typical interaction with Pan. I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Other people were being told to stay a second year. I don't remember anyone really asking me to stay a second year. However, I still wanted to stay. My first team suffered as they slept in the van at the truck stop in New York. For the first time, I held responsibility for the physical and spiritual needs of 7 or 8 other girls. The abused became the abuser. We suffocated in the heat of the E350 Ford van. Skip forward 3 months later, a girl said, "Wow, Talia Uni, those are some deep breaths." I hyperventilated as I drove down a street in Colorado. I dropped the 5 or 6 fundraisers off in a strip mall. I forgot a package in the next town at the post office. I had to get it before we left for the next town. So I turned on my cell phone and drove back to the last town. While I drove along the winding roads and ledges around mountains, I screamed out my lungs. My chest hurt. I felt pain and agony. I screamed and screamed, somehow keeping the van on the road. The ice chains I did not properly put on were slapping around the side of the van. Then I was super late picking everyone up. Even one girl was waiting alone at the empty bar in the small town. I called and called on my cell phone, worried someone would freeze to death or get abducted. We were far from our families, comfort, and home. Isolated and cut off from loved ones. Dependent on this church to feed us and keep us going. They filled our heads with thoughts of how the outside world was evil, how we had to remain perfect, how we had to dedicate ourselves to making the most money, ultimately, all to earn more dollars. And then who the hell thought this was a good idea? Someone decided to blindfold all the leaders and drop them off in a random place. I got dropped off in a random town with another girl with no money or directions. That's insane. That's insane. I almost cried, and the other girl did cry the first night. We went around a gas station asking for money. We raised enough to get Subway and sleep in a hotel the first night. I called my boss the next day and said, "I found out where we are. I earned $100 so far." He responded, "Keep finding places to fundraise. Set 15-minute goals and make sure to make your way back to the leader house in a week." But without money, how are you going to do that? How are you going to survive? This is the most insanely reckless thing. I can't. This is so insane. I don't even know. There's nothing else to say about it. That's insane. That's crazy person stuff right there. At the end of the week, my partner and I dragged our luggage behind us as we ran after the bus home. We were almost happy to see everyone else. We met everyone at the connecting station and took the bus back all together. This missionary group was part of why I developed so much trauma. I pushed myself past my limits. At the end of 2 years, I was left empty and lost. I couldn't answer simple questions, and this is how I came home. My parents and family were confused and worried. Still, until I started thinking it was the church that started it, I thought it was normal. I thought I was supposed to suffer. I needed someone to tell me this isn't normal. Anyone who left the church was seen as an outsider, and God forbid someone write a book against the church. The book and person were to get shunned. I didn't dare explain about the church or doubt, not a chance. I needed to tell my parents how much I suffered. Sometimes, keeping trauma a secret is worse than trauma itself. It was not until years and years down the road that I had the holy shit moment, and I realized I was in a cult. At first, I had the vendetta of exposing the church, of its malpractice, of taking vulnerable young adults and using them for personal gain. taking them from their families and separating them from their friends, postponing important educations. At the time, I became a missionary. That is what I identified as, a young, vulnerable adult who really needed to go to college and get an education on life. Leaving behind the church and going to college came with struggles. The transition into the real world did not bode well for me. The church still had its grasp on me. Oh man. You know, I was out of touch. I was in my first couple years of college, and I don't think I ever had any knowledge that Talia was up to this kind of thing. I knew she was doing mission type stuff, but I don't think I never knew anything about it. And this is not the first time I've heard about a mission that was highly financially motivated, because churches in the US may not pay any taxes, but they still have operating costs. They're still churches are corporations. It's a special type of corporation, but it is a corporation, and it needs money to survive. So it doesn't surprise me that, just like in a regular corporation, everything eventually kind of becomes geared toward a profit. But yeah, that sounds just like a masochistic experiment to drop people blindfolded, or to blindfold people and bring them somewhere and just drop them with no money. That's stupid. That's really, really risky. I've literally, at no point in my life have I been in that situation. I had, like, everywhere I ever went on my own, I was a phone call away from my parents. And I think when I was, like, I think I was probably about 16 when my parents gave me one of their credit cards. And I mean, it's partly not like to brag or whatever, but like partly because I am trustworthy. Like I would never take advantage of that kind of trust. I would never violate that kind of trust. But the reason they gave me the credit card is basically like, if you ever get in a serious bind, here you go, just use it, and so I always had that comfort, and I think I did use it a few times. I remember using it one time when I did a study abroad in London, and I don't remember the exact context, but I think I just knew I didn't have enough money in my account, and being in London is incredibly expensive. Number one, it's a huge city. Number two, the exchange rate makes your money just vanish. But anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there. Point is, I've always had that safety net, and I just can't imagine being somewhere with no money. I can't imagine what that would feel like. So we're getting toward an hour, so I probably won't go too much longer. Maybe one or two chapters. We'll see how this one goes. This next chapter is chapter 8. It's entitled Home to College. Rewind 2 years before becoming a missionary. There I am, as strong as a mountain and as bright as a neon sign. Colleges wanted me. They gave me scholarships and promises of a bright future. Even though I got waitlisted for the biggest college in my state, University of Minnesota, they called the next day to say a spot opened for me, with scholarships. I chose Hamlin University, which is, by the way, where my parents both went to college and where they met one another. And I actually toured it when I was looking for colleges, kind of partly because they wanted me to, so they could, revisit their stomping ground. But it seemed like a very nice place and not at all dissimilar from Bradley University, which is where I ended up going to college. I chose Hamlin University for several reasons. First of all, I wanted to go to a liberal arts school. I did too, honestly. One with a strong writing program. And Dee Dee, the admissions counselor, sold me on the idea of being an English major. I loved Dee Dee for her large, dimpled cheeks, bright smile, and huge doe eyes. My face heated up painfully as my parents bragged to her about my work ethic and wonderful grades. It was true enough. It was true, though. I worked hard to get to college, and finally someone recognized the work. Then I wanted a tight-knit community. Hamlet had small class sizes, and this attracted me. It promised more individualized attention. And third, I wanted the college to be liberal in other ways too, meaning it had progressive values and inclusive attitudes. I'm glad I chose Hamlin in hindsight because they handled my disabilities in a caring way. The university kept checking in on me throughout my missionary years. Thank God. Hours south to the cities and delivered me to the school. The first few days, the school invited my parents to hang out with me. We walked over to the old student center. Some of the students hung out in this low-lying building before the new student center was built. We posed in front of a camera. The three of us huddled together, and my parents beamed like they felt so proud to be there. I had a sheepish smile. This picture is evidence of how proud my parents were to send their daughter off. After the picture, my mentor told my parents and the rest of the parents it was time to say goodbye to their children. My parents didn't move. They kept looking at me like this was the last time they'd ever see me. I could see the conflict in my mom's eyes. She wanted to let me go and get my education, and yet she didn't want to let me go. Dad, too, seemed to hang back with my mom, even though all the other parents were walking to their car. Finally, my mom said, "Whoa." Don't know if you could hear that, but that pan was moving quickly through the room. Dad, too, seemed to hang back with my mom, even though all the other parents were walking to their car. Finally, Mom said, "Well, I guess that is it. I guess this is where we say goodbye." There was so much sadness in my mom's voice. Even my dad's voice sounded hoarse when he said, "Okay, bye, Talia." I felt bad for them, and I too felt the pain of saying goodbye. The parents shuffled back to their cars, and the adult children went outside to the common grounds to start the first unofficial class. It consisted of get-to-know-you icebreakers. One girl said she decided to get her septum pierced because it was unique. When it came time for me to talk, words lodged into my throat. I thought I sounded stupid and boring, so I hardly said anything. I think that, saying goodbye to your parents when you go to college moment is just a universally, it's just a universally, what's the word? Just applicable moment for anybody who goes to college. You're like, oh my God, is this really it? Like, this is really where we say goodbye, and we don't live together anymore, and we don't, we won't be part of one another's daily life anymore. That's a hard moment. No question, that's a pretty difficult moment. And that doesn't necessarily come with college. That's my experience, because I did go to college. But if you don't go to college, you're still going to have that moment. There's that last time you sleep in your home with your parents. Or maybe there's not. Maybe you go back. But you know what I'm saying. Kind of reminds me of that phrase. This just chokes me up every time. But for everyone, there's a last time when their parent picks them up and puts them down and never picks them up again. That's a tearjerker. Like, that's a really, like, it's a very profound thing. But anyway. And by the way, I have a septum piercing too, so I didn't do it because I thought it was unique. I did it because, one, I thought it was one of the coolest piercings because it's very in your face, literally. Also, it's hideable because I wanted to be a professional and, I don't know, make lots of money, and I thought that would be a barrier to that. And I also thought it was hardcore because it is it's pretty painful, like compared to a lot of other things. I mean, the tip of your nose is very sensitive. I mean, if you just squeeze the tip of your nose a little bit, it'll probably hurt. So it is one of the more harder core ones, in my opinion. Anyway. Well, so yeah, Talia, she choked and hardly said anything during the icebreaker. The next day, during my first official class, I chickened out. By the time I found the classroom, I was so late I was embarrassed to walk in. I've always felt I failed my first class on the first day. I walked to the lunchroom and began eating my feelings away. Eventually, one of my classmates found me. She had cute, quirky clothes, a cool haircut, and a friendly smile. "We missed you in class," she said. I gave her no explanation as to why I hadn't been there. She kindly said, "Hope to see you at the next one." I did make it to the next class. My teacher asked me what happened and if I was all right. I said I was all right and that I had been sick and something to excuse myself. He kindly said, "As long as you're all right." The first week overwhelmed me. I had lots of syllabi reading and getting to know each other. The first time I walked into the library to start my first study session, I spent 20 minutes walking around looking for the perfect spot to sit. Every floor had dozens of students sitting in front of computers, reading books, or bent over notes. The red carpet seemed especially vibrant and red. The books seemed to pulse in their shelves. My delusion of everything being brighter and more alive happened more in the future. I came home in the night after my roommate fell asleep and climbed into bed. Those nights I fell asleep immediately and slept like a rock. I felt exhausted. Sometimes I fell asleep in the library standing up. I read all through the night, got up early, and did homework while I ate. I started this trend during my missionary days of working instead of eating, or only allowing myself 15 minutes to eat. Some days I told myself it was a weakness to eat, sleep, or relax. I basically never relaxed. I planned my schedule down to the minute. I still do that. I do not relax. I just don't relax. Even when like I stream and game, like that's not, it doesn't feel relaxing to me because some annoying part of my head like turns everything I do into a task. Yeah, it's frustrating to be in that mindset for sure. The day after my speech exam, my professor called me into his office. I walked in carrying a huge stack of books. My arms were overloaded with probably 15 pounds or more of textbooks. I sweated from the heat and the exertion of carrying these books from class to class. I had a chemistry test that afternoon, so I carried my huge book assigned to the class and a few from the library. My professor asked, "Were you nervous you were going to get in trouble today?" I responded, "A little bit, but I'm just not sure how I did on the exam." He smiled and said, "I figure since you picked such a creative approach to answering the essay question at the end." That semester we talked about the roots of public speaking, starting in Greece with Socrates. At the end of the exam, I wrote a play about Socrates coming to our modern-day classroom and explaining his idea of ethos, pathos, and logos. My professor responded, "Well, you have nothing to worry about, because I loved it." Really? I gasped. Yes, he laughed. As I got up to leave, his mood changed to concerned. How are you carrying all those books? He fumbled under his desk for a minute and pulled out a green nylon reusable grocery bag. We both stood up. And he helped me stuff all the textbooks into my bag. Into the bag. At the library, I picked up another chemistry book from the shelf and began comparing notes. There was a wooden book holder. I got tired of looking down at my book, so I took one of the dictionary holders and rested the book on it. I rested my head in my hands after reading a couple of pages and began dozing off. Speech went well, but chemistry suffered. I was getting a D in that subject. My first-year seminar professor instructed me to take less classes the next semester and asked me if I could pass chemistry. I assured him I would, though I didn't feel confident at all I could. A kind of denial said I could, though. Chemistry was my hardest class. Even my tutor felt bad for me and asked me how he could help me. I went every week to tutoring sessions and still didn't comprehend the material. Everything was going too fast and going over my head. I got behind on assignments and did poorly on the quizzes. I felt ashamed of my grades. During winter break, I felt the heaviness in my heart looking at my grades. The D in chemistry was a heavy weight to bear. I told my parents it was a tough class, but that I could pass. They never pushed when it came to grades. I pushed myself plenty for the both of them, though. And then the first year was over in the blink of an eye, and it was time to come home. So I'm over an hour now on my stream. First night I did 4 chapters, and tonight I've done 4 chapters, so I think that lends itself to some symmetry and is a sign that I should call it a night right there. I'm at page 70 out of 170, so I am making progress. Yeah, I don't think I really have anything else to say. I'm enjoying reading this, and this will be my thing for probably at least the rest of this week and probably all of next week as well. Yeah, just reading that, it does bring me back to when I started college and we did the same thing. We had kind of an icebreaker thing, and I haven't really come out about it very much, but I actually have kind of self-diagnosed myself. It's a little redundant. I have self-diagnosed myself with probably a social anxiety disorder that's been with me since I was probably 12, 13, 14. And I'm remembering during those first college icebreakers, I was just a wreck. I mean, 10 out of 10 on the fear response. And yeah, I wonder if Talia kind of has some of the same thing going on. Or maybe she just writes it off as shyness. Maybe she doesn't feel like it's an anxiety disorder. But regardless, just kind of a relatable situation. So yeah, I don't think I have anything else that I really wanted to ramble about tonight. So yeah, as always, if you watched, I hope you enjoyed. And whether or not you enjoyed, I hope you have a wonderful evening. I am going to go ahead and check. I probably shouldn't do a raid channel for this kind of thing, because if you enjoyed this, I don't think you'd be very likely to enjoy one of the other things. So I'm just going to sign off here, and